There's a particular kind of humiliation that doesn't explode loudly, it drips, politely, in broad daylight, with everyone smiling like it's normal. And that's the flavor of pain this 2026 drama, Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah, keeps pouring into the same glass for 3 long years before it finally tips the whole table over. You watch Daryl, this guy who has basically turned self-erasure into a full-time job, trying so hard to please Devya, the heiress of a rich family, and Devya doesn't just reject him, she treats him like an inconvenience that learned to speak. And then, right when the story has trained you to accept the cruelty as the game, the system, yes, an actual mission system, casually informs him that he's been playing the wrong game the entire time. His target was never Devya. It was Rona, Devya's mother. And if that premise twist doesn't immediately make you sit up a little straighter, I don't know what will. I'm talking about it today on Jonota News, and if you enjoy long-form drama breakdowns that actually linger on the emotional mechanics, you can subscribe, no pressure, just saying. Also, I'm going moderate on spoilers here. I'm going to dig into key turning points and what they do to the characters, but I'm not going to go stomping through the final stretch like I own the place. The reason I'm being careful is because this drama's main pleasure isn't what happens, it's that sinking realization of why it happens and who it happens to. The twist is in the brief you gave me, so we are allowed to talk about that. What we are not going to do is pretend we know every late-game outcome that wasn't actually provided. Still, even with the guardrails on, there's a lot to chew on, because the show uses that system reveal less like a plot trick and more like a moral rearrangement. It takes the hierarchy Daryl has been trapped inside and rotates it 90 degrees so every relationship suddenly casts a different shadow. What hit me first, before the system twist even lands, is the way the drama frames Daryl's devotion as labor. Not romance, not loyalty, not even desperation in the melodramatic sense. Labor. 3 years is not a cute time skip, 3 years is a slow rewrite of a person's nervous system. The show seems to understand that. It doesn't play his efforts as charming persistence. It plays them as repeated transactions where Daryl keeps paying and Devya keeps raising the price. And the humiliations, from what the storyline implies, aren't singular huge events as much as a constant atmosphere, dismissive looks, public belittling, the kind of "I didn't ask you to do that" weaponized after you've already done it. It's the rich family heir dynamic turned into a treadmill, Daryl running, Devya not even turning her head, and the world acting like that's the natural order. If you've ever watched someone bend themselves smaller to fit inside a relationship that only rewards them with silence, this show pokes that bruise with a very steady finger. Here's where I'll give it credit as a piece of storytelling craft. The premise could have easily become a one-note pity parade, but it keeps sneaking in tiny choices that suggest Daryl isn't only a victim. He's complicit, not in the sense that he deserves anything, absolutely not, but in the sense that he's actively buying into the system's definition of success. The drama doesn't have to say that out loud. You feel it when his posture is always slightly forward, like he's apologizing for existing in the same frame as Devya. You feel it when his speech, at least in the way the story positions it, seems designed to avoid conflict rather than communicate truth. That's not a flaw in the character writing, that's the point. Daryl is the kind of person who has confused endurance with worthiness, and the system feeds that confusion because it benefits from it. And the longer it goes on, the more you start asking, is he trying to win Devya's approval, or is he trying to prove something to himself? And if that question doesn't keep getting sharper, the drama would collapse under its own repetition. So the timing of the system's wrong target reveal matters. It's not just a twist, it's a slap in the face that arrives at the exact moment Daryl thinks he's almost finished suffering for a reason. That's the sickest part, the mission is almost complete. The story basically lets Daryl believe the pain is about to pay off. Then it yanks the receipt out of his hand and says, "Actually, you were in the wrong line." There's something so darkly funny about that, like cosmic customer service, but it's also horrifying, because it means all those humiliations weren't even strategically necessary. They were just accepted, normalized, rationalized. And the drama, to its credit, doesn't soften how destabilizing that would be. your identity can survive rejection. It doesn't survive meaninglessness as easily. Let me linger on how the show seems to build Devya as a presence, because this is where a lot of dramas get lazy. Rich gold heiress is a template. You can slap it onto anyone, give her a designer wardrobe and a cruel mouth, and call it a day. But Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah feels like it's at least trying to make Devya's cruelty textured. And yes, I'm aware how that sounds. I'm not excusing her. I'm saying the drama seems to want us to understand that humiliation is a language she's fluent in, not just a mood she's in. Devya doesn't only reject Daryl, she positions him. She assigns him a place beneath her, and by doing that she reinforces her own place above the rest of the world. That's what heirs are trained to do in these stories, defend the hierarchy by performing it. But here's a contrarian take that surprised me even as I felt it forming. Devya's nastiness, as awful as it is, might be the most honest thing about that household. I know, hear me out before you throw your phone. In these rich family dramas, there's usually a layer of polite hypocrisy, people smile while cutting you. Devya, at least, doesn't pretend. She humiliates Daryl openly, which is monstrous, but it also exposes the family's values without the perfume. It's like she's saying, this is how it works here, while everyone else would rather hide behind etiquette. And that matters because when the story pivots toward Donna, the mother, the tone of power changes. Devya's power is youthful, impulsive, theatrical. Donna's power, based on the premise, feels like it could be quieter, institutional, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice because the walls already agree with it. If Devya is the blade, Donna might be the hand that holds it, and that shift is where the drama gets interesting in a way that isn't just surprise, older woman romance. It's about the architecture of control. Because let's be real, the moment the system says the target is Donna, the entire genre expectation tilts. Suddenly you are not just watching a guy chase an heiress. You are watching him realize he's been orbiting the wrong sun. And there's a specific kind of dread in that, because if Devya has been humiliating him for 3 years as the target, what does it mean that she wasn't even the mission? Was she collateral? A test? A gatekeeper? Or was Daryl simply placed there because the system knew he'd accept mistreatment and keep going? That's the moment the drama stops being only about romance dynamics and starts being about exploitation, emotional, social, possibly economic. And if you've been half-watching until then, this is the point where the show quietly demands your full attention. One thing I want to praise, at least conceptually, is the way a system-based story can externalize inner denial. The system is basically a voice that makes the subtext literal. It tells Daryl what he's supposed to want. It turns relationships into tasks. It gamifies intimacy. And the drama's central cruelty is that Daryl has allowed that gamification to replace his own instincts. That's not sci-fi, that's heartbreak with a UI overlay. A lesser show would treat the system as a fun gimmick, quest completed, hearts gained, cue romantic montage. This one, judging by the storyline's emotional setup, seems to treat it as an abusive boss. And the reveal that the target was wrong is like HR admitting they've had you working the wrong job title for 3 years, except the salary is your dignity. Now, because we don't have a fully detailed scene list, I'm going to talk in impressions, but I can still picture the kind of mini-scene this drama thrives on, because the premise practically begs for it. Imagine a wide, glossy interior, rich family house, the kind of space that is technically beautiful but emotionally refrigerated. Everything is clean lines, pale marble, art that costs more than most people's cars, and the air feels expensive in that annoying way. Daryl stands near the edge of the room, not sitting, because he doesn't feel allowed. Devya is closer to the center, where the light naturally lands, like the house itself is spotlighting its chosen person. She doesn't even need to yell. She can say something small, something like a casual dismissal, "Why are you still here?" with a faint smile that tells everyone watching that Daryl is a joke they're permitted to laugh at. And Daryl's face, if the actor is doing it right, doesn't crumple dramatically. It tightens. His eyes flick down for half a second, then up again, forcing composure like he's swallowing glass and trying not to make it obvious. The sound design in a scene like that matters. You let the room go slightly quiet, you emphasize the subtle click of a heel turning away, the soft clink of a cup being set down, the kind of tiny domestic sounds that become humiliating because they continue as if nothing happened. And then you cut, not to a big crying scene, but to Daryl alone somewhere dimmer, maybe a corridor or a service area, where the light is colder and his breathing is finally audible. That's the kind of cinematic grammar this story wants, power bathed in warmth, the powerless pushed into the blue. If the drama actually follows through on that kind of visual contrast, it earns a lot of emotional credibility. Because the story is about social positioning, and cinematography is literally positioning. Blocking is politics. Who gets the center of the frame, who gets the doorway, who's shot from above, who's shot with shallow depth of field like the world doesn't consider them fully real, those choices become the silent narrator. And with a rich family setting, production design is storytelling too. A mansion can be filmed like a palace or like a cage. The difference is whether the camera admires it or fears it. I found myself hoping the show leans into the cage interpretation, because it matches the premise. Daryl has been in a gilded trap, mistaking proximity for acceptance. Also, can we talk about the sheer audacity of the system waiting until, almost complete, to correct itself? That's not just a plot beat, it's a worldview. It suggests a universe where effort doesn't guarantee meaning, where suffering doesn't automatically purchase redemption, and where the people in power don't even have to be the real goal to ruin your life. And this is where I'll make my personal confession. I have a low-grade existential weakness for stories that weaponize wasted time. It's not even the heartbreak that gets me, it's the idea of investing years into the wrong person, the wrong goal, the wrong version of yourself, and then having to stand there with the leftover feelings like they're groceries you can't return. That specific flavor of regret? It makes my stomach drop in a way that's almost embarrassing. And Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah builds its whole emotional engine on that drop. What keeps it from being misery for misery's sake is the pivot, the moment Daryl has to reorient. Because wrong target isn't only an external correction, it's an invitation, maybe the first real invitation he's had in years, to ask what he wants outside the system. And the show could go two ways here. It could make Daryl immediately swing his devotion from Devya to Donna like a pendulum, which would be, honestly, kind of bleak, because it would mean he's learned nothing except how to obey new instructions. Or it could slow down and let that reveal crack him open. Let him get angry. Let him get petty, even. Let him grieve the person he became while chasing Devya. The best version of this drama, in my mind, is the one that allows Daryl to be messy in his awakening, not instantly noble. Because 3 years of swallowing humiliation doesn't produce a clean hero. It produces someone who doesn't know where to put all that swallowed rage. And this is where the acting will either make the drama addictive or make it feel like a concept pitch that never became human. Daryl needs an actor who can do restraint without going blank. You need micro-expression work, the half-second delay before he answers, the reflexive smile that appears because he's trained it into his face, the way his shoulders might rise when Devya enters a room like his body is bracing for impact. Devya, meanwhile, is a tricky performance challenge because cruelty is boring when it's one note. The actor has to find variety in contempt, sometimes playful, sometimes sharp, sometimes almost absent-minded, like she's not even aware she's hurting someone because to her it's as normal as breathing. And then Donna. Donna is the real test, because she can't just be older, more elegant Devya. If the drama wants the twist to matter, Donna's presence has to reorganize the atmosphere. When she enters, the room should feel like it lowers its voice. I keep thinking about dialogue texture in stories like this, because system dramas often fall into a mechanical rhythm, quest instructions, reactive banter, repeated verbal motifs. But the premise here suggests an opportunity for something more acidic and precise. Devya's insults, if written well, won't sound like generic villain lines. They'll sound like the kind of thing rich people say when they've never had to consider consequences, offhand, almost bored, like she's commenting on a piece of furniture that doesn't match. Daryl's responses, for most of the early stretch, should feel like he's constantly negotiating tone. Not what to say, how to say it so he doesn't trigger another humiliation. That's a very specific survival skill. And when the system finally drops the wrong target bomb, the dialogue should change texture. Fewer apologies. More silence. The kind of silence that finally has weight because it's no longer only submission, it's processing. And I love, when a drama understands that silence is an edit choice. If the show gives the reveal room to breathe, if it doesn't smash cut into comedy or immediate action, it lets the audience sit in the psychic whiplash with Daryl. The editing rhythm becomes emotional alignment. Quick cuts can mimic panic, long takes can mimic disassociation. Even something as simple as letting a shot linger on Daryl's face after the system message disappears, letting us watch him try to restitch his understanding of reality, that can be more devastating than any shouted confrontation. This is a story about someone realizing his life has been misfiled. Treat it with the appropriate stillness and it becomes painful in a good way. Now, because the storyline is brief, I'm careful not to claim specific scenes, but I can talk about the kind of turning point that usually follows a reveal like this, and why it matters. Once Daryl knows Donna is the real target, everything he does around Devya becomes recontextualized. He's no longer approaching the heiress as the end goal, she becomes an obstacle, a symptom, maybe even a mirror. And here's the delicious tension. Devya has spent 3 years humiliating him under the assumption that she is the center of his world. What happens to a person like that when she senses she isn't? Even if Daryl doesn't openly change at first, Devya will feel the shift if the writing is sharp, because people like her are sensitive to attention the way royalty is sensitive to protocol. The smallest withdrawal reads like treason. That's one of the questions that kept me engaged. Is the drama going to frame Devya's reaction as jealousy, as wounded pride, as genuine fear of abandonment, or as rage at losing control? Those are 4 very different flavors, and each one says something different about the show's moral imagination. A lazier drama will default to, jealous rich girl finally realizes she loves him, which can be fun but also kind of cheap given the 3 years of cruelty. A braver drama might let Devya remain cruel but become strategically crueler once she realizes Daryl's devotion isn't guaranteed. That would be chilling. Or, if the writers are really paying attention, they might let Devya's cruelty crack into something like confusion, not redemption, not softness, but confusion, because she's never had to deal with someone opting out of the hierarchy she assumed was permanent. And then there's Donna. The mother. The actual target. The pivot point. The person who, in a family like this, likely understands power as something you inherit and something you maintain. The drama doesn't give us details about Donna's personality, so I won't pretend I know her. But the premise itself does something fascinating. It implies that the correct strategy in this world is not to chase the loud power, the daughter, but the structural power, the mother. And that is such a pointed little social commentary if you stop and taste it. Devya is the face of wealth. Donna is the engine. Daryl has spent 3 years pleading with the face while the engine kept running without noticing him. That's not only a romantic redirection, it's a critique of how people misread where influence truly sits. If the show handles Donna with nuance, she becomes the most compelling character almost by default. Because think about it, a woman in Donna's position has likely survived a life of negotiation, marriage politics, family expectations, wealth management, social appearances. She may be softer than Devya, or she may be colder in a more refined way, but either way she's practiced. And Daryl, who has been enduring Devya's obvious contempt, might not even recognize Donna's subtler forms of control until he's already entangled. That's where the drama can get deliciously thorny. It can ask whether Daryl is actually escaping anything or just upgrading to a more sophisticated cage. Here's another angle I appreciated, and I didn't expect to. The title, Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah, is basically a thesis statement about misaligned intention. Wrong strategy, fate changes. And it's tempting to read that as a simple plot summary. He targeted the wrong person, now his fate changes. But the more interesting read is psychological. The wrong strategy might not be Devya instead of Donna. The wrong strategy might be pleasing someone as the foundation of a life. The wrong strategy might be believing that love is something you earn by being small enough. If the drama leans into that, it becomes less about which woman he approaches and more about whether Daryl can stop treating human connection like a mission checklist. And speaking of the system, because I know some people are allergic to the system voice trope, I'll say this: even if you are not a fan of gamified storytelling, this drama seems to use the system as an antagonist rather than a gimmick. The system's coldness is the point. It treats people like targets. It measures progress. It reduces relationships to completion percentages. That's unsettling, and it should be. When Daryl is told, after all that the target was wrong, it makes the system feel less like a helper and more like a manipulator who doesn't care what it breaks as long as the mission advances. And yes, I realize I'm getting heated about a fictional interface. This is who I am now. Let me have this. Still, the drama can't rely on concept alone, it needs escalation that feels emotionally logical. 3 years of humiliation is heavy, and if the show doesn't modulate that weight, if it stays in the same register too long, it risks numbing the audience. But the premise implies a structural shift at the exact right time, the near completion moment, then the reveal, then the reorientations toward Donna. That's a built-in pacing engine. It's like the story runs one track for a long time, then suddenly switches rails and forces you to watch the same landscape from a different window. The best dramas use that kind of mid-course correction not just to refresh plot, but to reframe themes. We go from class cruelty to power geometry. We go from unrequited devotion to what devotion does to your selfhood. And if you want the really juicy tension, here it is: Daryl's relationship to Devya has been defined by humiliation, yes, but also by familiarity. 3 years creates a routine. Even pain becomes routine. So when the system says, wrong target, Daryl isn't just being asked to approach someone new, he's being asked to leave the only emotional environment he's learned to survive in. That's terrifying. People underestimate how hard it is to step out of a toxic dynamic when it's become your normal. The drama can make that transition feel real by showing Daryl hesitating, rationalizing, maybe even backsliding. Not because he loves Devya, necessarily, but because he knows how to be miserable with her. The unknown, Donna, the mother, the real target, is a different kind of risk. What I'd want, as a viewer who likes character-driven tension, is for the show to let Daryl's strategy shift in visible, incremental ways. Not a sudden glow-up where he becomes a different person overnight. I want to see him testing boundaries and then flinching when someone pushes back. I want to see him say no once and then spend the whole night replaying it in his head, terrified of consequences that might not even come. I want to see Devya clock those tiny changes and respond not with immediate melodrama but with that quiet recalibration of someone who is used to being obeyed. And I want Donna to be watching, maybe not openly, maybe not even consciously, but present enough that her eventual involvement feels like it has gravity, not convenience. Because if the drama goes too fast into the new target, it risks trivializing the 3-year setup. Those 3 years have to matter. Not as suffering for entertainment, but as psychological context. Daryl's instincts, his self-image, his fear responses, those should carry forward like scars. And Devya, too, shouldn't be reduced to a disposable villain the moment Donna enters the narrative focus. Devya is still the daughter of Donna. That relationship alone is a goldmine for subtext. What did Devya learn from her mother? Is Devya acting out what Donna modeled? Or is Devya rebelling against Donna by being cruel in a more obvious way? The drama doesn't have to answer it immediately, but if it even asks the question through performance and staging, it becomes richer. One of the most compelling thematic threads here, at least from the premise, is generational power. Devya's wealth is inherited, Donna's power is maintained. Daryl is the outsider who tries to climb by pleasing the heir. But what if the real gatekeeper was always the mother? That's not just romance plot, That's commentary on how society often tells you to chase the shiny symbol of success while the actual decision-makers sit behind curtains. If the show is smart, it will make the Daryl-Donna dynamic less about taboo and more about negotiation, two adults with very different kinds of leverage, circling a mission that may not be as simple as approach and win. And yes, I can already hear the audience split forming, because a premise like this invites it. Some viewers will come in wanting Devya humbled, wanting Daryl to move on and find someone better, and the system twist feels like the universe granting that wish. Other viewers will be uncomfortable with the idea of Donna becoming the target at all, because it can read like a fantasy of power proximity rather than genuine connection. Both reactions are valid, and the drama's success will depend on whether it acknowledges the discomfort instead of smoothing it over. The show can't pretend the mother twist is neutral, it's inherently charged. If it treats it like a cheap surprise, it'll feel gross. If it treats it like a shift into deeper critique about systems, class, agency, then it becomes genuinely intriguing. And I'm going to say something that might irritate people who want clean moral sorting. I don't actually need Daryl to be pure for the story to work. In fact, I think it works better if he isn't. If Daryl approaches Donna because the system tells him to, that's compromised from the start. If he approaches her because he sees a new route to safety or status, that's also complicated. But that complication is the point. The drama is called Rowing Strategy. It's about flawed approaches to survival. A morally spotless protagonist would feel dishonest in this environment. What I need is emotional truth. If Daryl is opportunistic, show me the shame under it. If he's sincere, show me the fear under that sincerity. If he's confused, let him be confused without turning it into slapstick. One more craft note that I think matters a lot here: music. A drama like this lives or dies by tonal discipline. If the score romanticizes Devya's cruelty, it becomes unwatchable. If the score melodramatizes every humiliation, it becomes exhausting. The strongest choice is often restraint, music that underscores the emptiness of these interactions rather than the drama of them. A soft, almost mechanical motive for the system's presence could be chilling, especially if it bleeds into scenes where Daryl is trying to be human. And when the wrong target reveal happens, I'd want the music to drop out more than swell up. Let the silence do the work. Let the audience hear Daryl's breathing. Let the room tone feel too loud. That's how you make a twist feel like an existential event rather than a plot checkpoint. There's also a subtle satisfaction in watching a story interrogate the word target. It's such a predatory term, and the drama seems fully aware of that. A target is something you aim at. It's not someone you listen to. So when the system corrects Daryl, target is Donna, it's not just redirecting his affection. It's redirecting his aim. And that's where I start wondering, is the drama ultimately criticizing Daryl for treating people like objectives, or is it criticizing the system for forcing him into that mindset? It can be both. The best version is both. Because Daryl can be harmed and still harm others. Devya can be cruel and still be shaped by her environment. Donna can be powerful and still be trapped in her own role. That's the triangle of human messiness the premise sets up. And right as the story reaches that pivot, where Daryl is standing on the edge of mission almost complete, hearing the system tell him the past 3 years were pointed in the wrong direction, the drama finds its real nerve. It's no longer just about whether he can win someone's approval. It becomes about what it means to build a life around someone else's scoreboard, and what happens when the scoreboard suddenly changes the rules. Daryl's next move, whether he resists, whether he obeys, whether he tries to renegotiate with the system, whether he spirals, becomes the first truly free choice he's made in a long time, even if it doesn't feel free at all. And the tension in that moment, the way the story positions it, isn't loud. It's tight. It's the kind of tension where you can almost hear the blood in your ears as he realizes that approaching Donna isn't just a new mission, it's walking into the family's actual center of gravity, where Devya's cruelty might have been loud, but Donna's influence is absolute. Where Devya's cruelty might have been loud, but Donna's influence is absolute. And the drama, at least in the way it sets up this pivot, understands that absolute doesn't have to look like a throne. It can look like a perfectly timed pause before someone answers you. It can look like a hand resting on a teacup, unmoving, while everyone else rushes to fill the silence. It can look like a woman who doesn't need to humiliate you because the room will do it for her if she simply watches long enough. That's why the idea of Daryl redirecting toward Donna is so unsettling and so electric at the same time. He's not switching from one romance route to another like you are changing tabs on a browser. He's stepping from a storm you can see into a weather system you can't. The first thing I found myself wanting from the narrative, right at this moment, is not a go-get-her montage, not a sudden confidence surge, but a pause where Daryl actually feels the betrayal. Because there's betrayal in this twist even if nobody did it in a human way. 3 years of his life was structured around a promise: do the tasks, endure the indignities, reach completion. When the system admits the target was wrong, it's basically confessing that it treated his time as disposable. And time is the one resource you can't bargain back. If the drama gives Daryl a beat where anger finally arrives, not at Devya, not even at Donna, but at the logic that reduced his humanity to progress bars, that's the first real step toward him becoming a character rather than a device. And what's smart is that even if he does get angry, he can't easily direct it anywhere safe. You can't argue with a social order the way you argue with a person. He can't exactly stand in the middle of the mansion and announce, "I'm mad at the system that gamified my dignity," because everyone would just blink at him like he's having a breakdown. So the anger has to seep out in other ways: hesitation, refusal, a failure to show up, a new tone in his voice that Devya immediately reads as disrespect. That's where performance and writing have to dance together. I'm always drawn to dramas where a character's rebellion begins as almost invisible to outsiders but feels seismic inside them. It's like watching the first crack in a dam: tiny line, massive consequences. The other reason this pivot works as a structural move is because it retroactively turns Devya into a test. Again, not in the cruel, the story planned your suffering sense, though the system kind of did, but in the thematic sense. Devya becomes the embodiment of Daryl's wrong strategy, chasing validation from someone who thrives on withholding it. If the drama stays honest, it won't soften Devya to make the pivot comfortable. It will let her remain who she is and force Daryl to reckon with what he tolerated. That's not an easy watch, but it's the kind of discomfort that makes a story stick in your ribs. And here's a question that kept tugging at me as I watched the premise unfold in my mind: what does approach Donna even mean in practice? Because if Donna is Devya's mother and part of the same wealthy structure, Daryl can't just stroll up and start being charming without tripping every alarm in the building. Approaching Donna is inherently political. It implies a shift in access, in status, in the family's internal optics. If Devya is used to being the one everyone performs for, the idea of Daryl pivoting upward threatens her not only emotionally but symbolically. It's like an employee who stops flattering the manager and starts speaking directly to the CEO. Even if the CEO hasn't asked for it, the manager will feel exposed. And that's where the drama can do something delicious with staging. Devya's scenes with Daryl, especially early on, likely place them in spaces Devya controls: public rooms, social settings, family events, places where she has the home court advantage. Donna's scenes, if the director is paying attention, should feel different in geography. Donna might be encountered in transitional spaces: a hallway, a private study, a car, a quiet garden corner, the kind of location where power doesn't have to perform itself because it's already assumed. The shift from showy humiliation to quiet evaluation can be communicated purely through where the camera places them and how much space Donna is allowed to occupy without speaking. It also changes the lighting language. Devya's cruelty, in my head, plays under bright, flattering light, the cruelty of someone who doesn't fear being seen. Donna's power, by contrast, benefits from shadow and warmth: soft, expensive, controlled. If Devya is shot with crisp contrast and sharp lines, like her edges are always a little too clean, Donna should be shot like she's part of the room's texture. Not because she's passive. Because she's integrated. That's how real power often looks, not like a spotlight, but like architecture. And I'll be honest, I'm always suspicious when a drama introduces a mother as target twist, because it can easily slide into sensational territory, or worse, treat the mother like an exotic prize. But the premise here feels less like a salacious hook and more like a critique of misdirected ambition. It's not, older woman is hotter, it's, Daryl misunderstood what the system was asking him to do, and that misunderstanding is a metaphor for how people misunderstand where their own happiness is supposed to come from. If the show plays it as a cheap taboo, it'll lose me. If it plays it as a psychological and social recalibration, it becomes genuinely compelling. And here comes a subtle rehook, because it's the hinge the whole series swings on. When Daryl finally stands within Donna's orbit, does he treat her like a human being, or does he treat her like a solution? That's where the writing has to prove its maturity. A lot of system-driven stories accidentally teach the protagonist to objectify people with a smile. Their targets, routes, affection levels. This drama has a chance to interrogate that. If Daryl approaches Donna with the same emptiness he approached Devya, performing, pleasing, swallowing, then the story becomes a loop, wrong target, same strategy. But the title promises fate changes, which implies strategy changes too. So we need the drama to force Daryl into situations where pleasing isn't enough, where he has to make choices that cost him something real, pride, comfort, safety. And Donna, as a character, needs to be written as someone who can detect performance. Because someone like her has spent a lifetime surrounded by it. One of the most interesting possibilities, even from this limited brief, is that Donna may not be impressed by Daryl's devotion in the way Devya expects devotion to work. Devya wants to be chased because it proves her centrality. Donna may view being chased as messy, dangerous, potentially embarrassing. Or she may view it as useful. That ambiguity is where tension lies. If Donna is the type to use people, then Daryl is walking into a different kind of exploitation. If Donna is the type to be emotionally starved behind all that control, Daryl's presence might poke at something she keeps locked down. Either way, it's not simple. And the drama's biggest challenge, honestly, is that Daryl has already given us 3 years of one-sided effort. That can make a protagonist feel passive if the show doesn't carefully chart the internal evolution. So I'm looking for the story to show us Daryl making decisions that aren't just reactive. Even small things. The first time he chooses not to show up when Devya snaps her fingers, that can be enormous if it's filmed like a seismic event. The show doesn't need fireworks. It needs consequence. Now, let's talk about Devya as a character beyond cruel heiress, because I think the show wants us to do that, even if it doesn't always make it easy. Devya humiliates Daryl. That's in the brief, and I'm not going to soften it. But humiliation is rarely random. It's often a defense mechanism dressed up as entitlement. Again, not an excuse, an explanation. In families like this, heirs are raised as symbols. Symbols aren't allowed to be weak. Symbols aren't allowed to be uncertain. So they overcompensate. They dominate. They become cruel because cruelty is control made visible. And the moment Daryl's focus shifts, Devya's control is threatened. I'm fascinated by what kind of insecurity surfaces then, because it tells us whether Devya is simply a villain archetype or a person shaped into a weapon. If the show is as good as its premise suggests it can be, Devya won't suddenly become sweet. She'll become strategic. That's a more realistic evolution for someone who has always had leverage. She might shift from direct insults to social maneuvers, isolating Daryl, manipulating access, playing the family's expectations like an instrument. Even without explicit plot specifics, you can feel how the dynamics would naturally escalate. And that escalation can be thrilling because it turns the romance-adjacent setup into something like a power thriller, still emotional, still intimate, but with social warfare in the subtext. And the system's role in that escalation is crucial. The system is the hidden puppet master, but it can't physically move people, it can only incentivize Daryl. That means the drama has to show how incentives distort perception. Daryl's brain, after 3 years, is wired to interpret every interaction in terms of progress. That's what makes the wrong target reveal so damaging. It doesn't just change his goal, it destabilizes his sense of reality. He can no longer trust his own reading of events. Was Devia's occasional softness, if it existed, real, or was it part of a system-induced hallucination of hope? Was Daril's persistence admirable, or was it self-harm dressed as loyalty? The show invites those questions just by dropping that twist. And I want to give a quick nod to how sound design can underline that destabilization. If the system has an auditory cue, a subtle ping, a low hum, a tone that signals mission update, the show can use it like a psychological trigger. The moment Daril hears it, his body reacts before his mind does. That's real. If you've been conditioned by a certain sound, phone notification, doorbell, someone's footsteps, you know the way your stomach tightens before you even think. A good drama uses that. It makes the system feel like an invasive presence in the room even when it's just information. Another rehook. Because this is where the series either becomes great or just clever, the real target being Donna isn't the twist. The twist is what Daril becomes when he realizes he's allowed to stop auditioning for someone who hates him. And that's why I keep circling back to performance. Daril's actor needs to play the unlearning. Unlearning is slower than learning. It's frustrating. It's non-linear. I want to see him try to act like his old self around Devia out of habit, smile, apologize, offer help, and then catch himself mid-sentence, like he's realized he's about to hand his throat back to the person who's been stepping on it. Those are the moments that make a character feel alive. The camera can help by staying close, letting us watch the thought happen in real time. Not a dramatic zoom, not a swelling violin, just proximity and trust. And Devia's actor needs to sell something else, the shock of losing an emotional servant. Because that's what Daril has been, functionally. Not a partner, not a friend, an emotional servant, someone whose job is to absorb Devia's moods without demanding reciprocity. When that servant stops functioning, Devia's world doesn't just lose affection, it loses a tool. The first time Devia realizes her insults aren't landing the way they used to, you want to see that micro flicker, confusion, then anger, then recalibration. It's like watching someone press a button and not get the expected result. That's a very human kind of panic, even when the person is cruel. Then there's Donna. And I'm going to be careful here because we don't have explicit details of her scenes, but I can talk about the kind of aura the drama needs to craft around her to make the pivot work. Donna has to be introduced, or reintroduced, if she's been present but peripheral, in a way that signals this is not Devia 2.0. She should carry a different rhythm. Devia's scenes probably move faster, sharp lines, quick reactions, a sense of youthful impatience. Donna's scenes should slow time. Longer pauses. More stillness. A smile that doesn't necessarily mean warmth. The editing should respect her gravity. If the show cuts away from her too quickly, it undermines the idea that she's the true center of power. And one of my favorite cinematic tricks in these kinds of stories is when a character's power is shown through other people's behavior. You don't need Donna to announce she's important. You show staff straightening when she enters. You show conversation subtly shifting. You show Devia, who humiliates everyone else, becoming slightly more controlled around her mother, as if there are lines even she won't cross. That's how you build Donna without exposition. The room tells you who she is. There's also something thematically rich about the idea that Daril's target is the mother of the person who mistreated him. Because it forces him into a moral knot. Is he approaching Donna to change his fate, or is he approaching her as a way to win against Devia? Revenge by proxy is a tempting human impulse. Even if Daril doesn't consciously want revenge, the dynamic invites it. And that's where the drama can get messy in the best way. It can explore how hurt people fantasize about turning the table, about making the person who humiliated them watch them become desirable to someone higher. It's petty, it's relatable, it's ugly, and it's real. If the show pretends Daryl's motivations are purely noble, it misses an opportunity for honest character work. And I know some viewers will be like, I don't want Daryl to be petty, I want him to be healed. I get it. But healing isn't aesthetically pleasing. Healing often looks like pettiness you later regret. It looks like trying on power the way a starving person tries on food, too fast, too much, not always graceful. The show seems positioned to tell that kind of story, and I respect it when a drama doesn't sanitize emotional recovery into inspirational quotes. A small aside, because my brain did this while watching this premise unfold, if a system told me after 3 years I had the wrong target, I would not calmly pivot to the new objective. I would lie down on the floor like a fainting Victorian woman. I would become one with the carpet. So if Daryl has a breakdown somewhere in this middle stretch, I'm not judging him. I'm taking notes. Back to craft. The production design in rich family dramas often does a lot of heavy lifting, and here it can do something especially pointed. Devia's spaces might be trendy, youthful, curated to show status, bright, sleek, social media ready. Donna's spaces should feel older, more grounded, more permanent. Dark wood, softer textures, objects with history. Not necessarily old-fashioned, but weighted. Because Donna's power should feel like something built over time, not just inherited. Even if she inherited wealth, she likely built her control within the family. That's a different kind of authority. And if Daryl is stepping into her orbit, he's stepping into the long game. Costuming can underline this too. Devia's wardrobe, again, speaking generally, could be sharp, statement-making, designed to dominate attention. Donna's wardrobe could be quieter but more expensive in a way you can almost feel, fabrics that catch light subtly, colors that don't scream but command. The difference between, look at me, and you will look at me. And Daryl, caught between them, should look like someone who doesn't quite belong in either aesthetic at first. His clothing might feel slightly off, too simple, too eager, too careful. And then, as he changes, his costuming might change too. Not into luxury necessarily, but into confidence, fewer apologetic choices. The pacing, structurally, has a risk here. The 3-year humiliation setup could make the early stretch feel repetitive, but the wrong target reveal is the pivot that re-energizes the narrative. The danger is that the show becomes too plot-driven after that, like it's rushing to justify the twist. The better move is to treat the twist as an emotional earthquake and then spend time in the aftershocks. Let relationships reconfigure slowly. Let suspicion grow. Let Devia's behavior shift in ways that are subtle at first, then overt. Let Donna's awareness, if she becomes aware, arrive in layers. Slow burn tension is more satisfying here than immediate fireworks. Because the core of the drama isn't who ends up with who. It's who gets to define what love means in a system designed to commodify it. That's what makes it feel more modern than it might look on the surface. It's not just a romance or a social hierarchy story. It's a story about transactional intimacy. Daryl has been trained to believe affection is a reward for good performance. Devia uses affection as punishment and bait. Donna likely uses affection as diplomacy, if she uses it at all. The drama can explore 3 different philosophies of love without ever giving a lecture, just by letting these characters collide. And this is where I want to praise the premise for something that sounds small but is actually huge. It makes the mother relevant. So many dramas treat parents as background furniture, strict dad, cold mom, comic aunt, just there to generate obstacles. Here, the mother isn't just an obstacle. She's the point. That's inherently more interesting because it forces the show to examine generational behavior. Devia didn't appear in a vacuum. Her entitlement, her cruelty, her belief that people exist to serve her, those are taught. Either by direct modeling or by the environment Donna maintained. If the drama is willing to implicate Donna in Devia's cruelty, while still allowing Donna to be complex, it becomes a story about how power reproduces itself. And I'm going to plant another question here because it kept me watching. If Donna is the true target, Did the system ever care about Daryl's feelings at all, or was he always just a tool to influence the family? That's where the plot can depend beyond romance. The system might not be about finding love. It might be about infiltrating power. And if that's the case, Daryl's 3 years with Devya weren't just misdirected affection, they were a training regimen. They taught him how to endure humiliation, how to navigate the household, how to read social cues, how to become invisible when needed. All skills that would be useful if the actual mission was to get close to Donna. The reveal that the target was wrong could even be read as the system lying, or testing, rather than genuinely making a mistake. I'm not claiming that's canon, I'm saying the story invites that paranoia, and paranoia is fuel in this kind of narrative. That paranoia can be mirrored visually. Think of shots where Daryl is reflected in mirrors, glass, polished surfaces, surrounded by wealth that literally reflects him but never holds him. Or shots framed through doorways, through railings, through architectural lines that make him look contained. Those are simple choices, but they build a feeling of being watched, of being managed. If the drama uses those tools, it can make the system feel omnipresent without needing constant on-screen text or voiceover. Now, I want to go back to Devya for a second, because a lot of audience conversation around a character like her tends to become binary. She's evil, she's misunderstood. And I'm not interested in that binary. I'm interested in the function she serves. Devya is the emotional weather Daryl has been living under. She's the embodiment of misdirected striving. And when the system tells him she was never the target, it doesn't absolve her, it makes her more tragic in a strange way. Because it implies Devya has been spending 3 years humiliating someone who wasn't even meant for her story. She's been pouring cruelty into a relationship that, from the system's perspective, was irrelevant. That's bleak. It suggests Devya's cruelty isn't strategic. It's habitual. It's who she is when she's bored. That's worse than a villain with a plan. And if the drama allows even a glimpse of that, Devya realizing, even for a split second, that she may not be the center of the narrative she thought she was, that could be a devastating moment. Not because we pity her more than Daryl, but because it reveals the emptiness of her power. Power that only exists when someone is beneath you is fragile. It requires constant maintenance. And the moment Daryl stops kneeling, Devya has to confront whether she has anything else to offer the world besides dominance. There's a version of this story where Devya becomes the loud antagonist and Donna becomes the quiet antagonist, and Daryl is just a pawn between them. That can work as melodrama, but it risks flattening Daryl into a camera we watch through rather than a person we watch. The version I'm hoping this drama chooses, the one that makes me say I loved it even while it frustrated me, is the version where Daryl begins to recognize the ways he's been trained and starts resisting not only Devya's cruelty but his own impulse to chase approval at any cost. And resistance can look like something very small. Like refusing to laugh at a joke that humiliates him. Like letting silence hang when Devya expects him to fill it with reassurance. Like making eye contact with Donna without flinching, not as flirtation but as a declaration, I am a person, not a tool. Those are the moments that, if filmed with restraint, can feel bigger than any dramatic confrontation. I want to talk briefly about editing rhythm again, because system dramas often overuse on-screen graphics and quick cuts to communicate progress, and that can cheapen emotional scenes. If Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah is as emotionally heavy as the premise suggests, it needs a slightly more grounded aesthetic. Use the system sparingly. Let the audience feel the weight of human interaction without constantly being reminded of the game layer. The system should intrude at the worst times, not the most convenient times. When it speaks, it should feel like an interruption of reality, not part of reality. That's how you make it unsettling. And music, too, should treat the system like a parasite. A motive that's slightly off-key, slightly synthetic, creeping in under otherwise naturalistic scenes. Then, when Daryl starts reclaiming agency, you can let the score become more organic, strings, piano, warmer tones. Not to romanticize his suffering, but to signal that he's returning to being human. That kind of sonic storytelling is subtle, but it's powerful. Now, let me relive a moment that this premise almost demands, the kind of scene I can practically see, even without specifics, because it's the emotional logic of the situation. Daryl is in a room with Devya after the reveal. The house is busy around them, maybe staff passing, maybe a family gathering in another room, but the space between them feels like a vacuum. Devya says something cutting, expecting the usual flinch. The usual apology. Daryl doesn't respond immediately. His eyes move, not down in shame, but sideways, as if he's seeing the room differently now, noticing the ways it's been designed to make him small. Devya's smile twitches. She repeats herself, a fraction sharper. The camera holds on Daryl's face. His jaw tightens. He inhales, controlled. And then he says something simple. Not a speech. Not a confession. Something like, I won't do that anymore. Or even just, no, 2 letters, but in this context it's a grenade. And the sound drops. Not literally, but emotionally. You hear the air conditioner. You hear a distant laugh from another room. You hear Devya's breath catch, not because she's heartbroken, but because she's never been told no by him. The lighting remains the same, the room stays beautiful, and yet something has rotted in it. That's the kind of scene where the drama can show you that the real rebellion isn't dramatic, it's quite refusal. And Devya's reaction, whether she snaps, whether she laughs, whether she threatens, whether she suddenly becomes eerily calm, would tell you everything about who she is when control slips. If the actors nail that kind of microtension, the show becomes addictive. Because you start watching not for plot points but for shifts in power that happen in a blink. A glance that lasts too long. A step forward. A chair not offered. A door held open or not held open. Rich family dramas live in those details, and this premise is built for them. Now, where does Donna come in during this recalibration? The story's most compelling move, for me, is if Donna isn't immediately positioned as a romantic endpoint but as a moral mirror. Daryl approaches her because the system demands it, but Donna's presence forces him to confront what he's doing. Because you can't complete a relationship with someone like Donna the way you complete a task. Not believably. There's too much context, too much risk, too much optics. So either the drama leans into the absurdity, showing Daryl trying and failing to game a real adult, or it leans into the psychological depth, showing Daryl slowly realizing that the system's language is incompatible with real connection. And Donna, as a character, can be written as someone who has survived a lifetime of being approached for the wrong reasons. Wealth attracts performance. Status attracts manipulation. People smile at you because you are useful, not because they like you. If Donna is smart, she will have defenses against that. She might test Daryl. She might keep him at a distance. She might be polite in a way that feels like a locked door. That's where the drama can create a delicious tension. Daryl is used to Devya's overt hostility. Donna's politeness might be harder to navigate because it gives him nothing to push against. And the show can use that to explore a theme I really love. Sometimes cruelty is easier to understand than restraint. Cruelty gives you a clear enemy. Restraint makes you question yourself. When Donna doesn't react, Daryl has to sit with his own motives. He can't blame her for humiliating him the way he can blame Devya. He has to look inward. That's character growth territory. There's also, potentially, a sharp commentary here about gendered power. Devya's power is socially allowed because she's young and rich. People tolerate her tantrums, her cruelty, because she's the heiress, because she's a spectacle. Donna's power might be socially coded as maternal, graceful, respectable. But that respectability can be weaponized. A mother in a wealthy family can destroy you with a phone call and still look like the victim. If the drama explores that, how feminine respectability can mask ruthless control, it becomes far more interesting than a simple romance twist. Another rehook, because it's the point where I think viewers either get hooked or bounce. What if the system didn't pick Donna because she's easier to win, but because she's harder, and hardship is the only language Daryl has been trained to speak? That's a sad thought, but it's also narratively rich. Daryl has been conditioned to equate love with struggle. So a target like Donna, distant, controlled, powerful, might feel familiar in the worst way. He might mistake her restraint for depth, her distance for dignity, her polite neutrality for potential affection. And if you've ever been in a pattern where you chase emotionally unavailable people because availability feels suspicious, this drama could hit uncomfortably close. Now, let's talk about structure and pacing again, because the story has a built-in, seasonal shape even without explicit episodes. You have the long setup, 3 years of humiliation, nearing mission completion. You have the pivot, wrong target reveal. Then you have what I'd call the recalibration arc. Daryl's behavior changes, Devya reacts, Donna becomes central. The risk is that the recalibration arc becomes too talky, too much strategizing, too much, now I must approach the mother, plotting. The reward is if the show treats recalibration as emotional and social rather than purely tactical. Strategy, in this title, isn't only about schemes. It's about how you choose to behave in a world that keeps telling you your value is conditional. And the show's dialogue needs to reflect that. I want Donna to speak in layered lines, sentences that can be read as kindness or as warning. Devya's lines should be sharp and often cruel, but ideally not repetitive. Daryl's lines should evolve from appeasement to clarity. Not necessarily to confidence, because confidence might take longer than the story allows, but to clarity, knowing what he won't tolerate. Clarity is more compelling than swagger. Also, I need to talk about the system as a narrative voice. Systems in dramas often function like a second narrator, and that can be either annoying or brilliant. If the system is written as neutral, it can feel like an exposition machine. If it's written as slightly sinister, too calm, too transactional, it becomes a character. And this premise suggests the system might be more sinister than Daryl realized. It let him suffer for 3 years and only corrected him at the last moment. That's not neutral behavior. That's either incompetence, cruelty, or manipulation. And the show can play with that ambiguity to keep tension alive even when human scenes slow down. Imagine the system's tone staying perfectly polite while delivering devastating information. That's one of the scariest kinds of writing, a calm voice saying, "You were wrong," with no apology, no recognition of harm. It mirrors how institutions harm people. Bureaucracy doesn't shout, it stamps papers. If the system is meant to symbolize that, then the drama isn't just a romance about targets, it's a critique of how external reward structures can hollow out a person's selfhood. And here's where my "loved it" stance comes in. Even as I stay fair, I love a drama that's willing to make its premise emotionally ugly. 3 years of humiliation is ugly. A system admitting it misdirected you is ugly. Redirecting your affection towards someone else because a system told you to is ugly. These are not cute tropes. They're uncomfortable. But discomfort, when handled with craft and empathy, is exactly what makes a story feel like it has teeth. Now, there's a potential audience concern I want to address without preaching. Some people might be waiting for Devya to get her comeuppance. They want the satisfaction of reversal. And I get that. Watching someone cruel face consequences is cathartic. But I also think the more interesting consequence for Devya isn't public humiliation or a dramatic downfall. It's irrelevance. It's losing the ability to define Daryl's emotional reality. It's being forced to watch someone she treated as disposable become unavailable. That's a different kind of consequence, quieter, but arguably more fitting. If the drama leans into that, it becomes less about revenge and more about liberation. And liberation, in this show, shouldn't look like Daryl winning Donna as a prize. That would be a sideways version of the same problem. Liberation should look like Daryl gaining the ability to choose. Even if he still chooses wrong sometimes. Especially if he still chooses wrong sometimes. Because growth isn't linear. If he pivots to Donna and starts performing again, the drama can use that to show how deep his conditioning goes. Then, if he eventually recognizes it, that recognition becomes meaningful. Let's linger on the mother-daughter dynamic, because it's the secret engine of the entire premise. Devya is the heir, but also the child. Donna is the parent, but also likely the architect of the family's public image. Their relationship, whether affectionate, tense, competitive, emotionally distant, will color everything Daryl does. If Devya is cruel, is Donna tolerant of that? Does Donna correct it? Does she reward it? If Devya humiliates Daryl, does Donna view Daryl as beneath them, or does she see his endurance as useful? The drama can make Donna's moral alignment ambiguous in the best way. She can be kinder than Devya in mannerisms while still being more dangerous in consequence. There's also a fascinating possibility that Donna might not even like Devya very much, not in an obvious villain way, but in that cold, disappointment way that rich families sometimes encode. If Devya is performing cruelty to impress her mother, that adds a whole new layer of tragedy. Devya humiliates Daryl to prove she's strong. Donna watches, perhaps with indifference. Devya becomes crueler to earn acknowledgement. Daryl becomes smaller to survive. The entire household becomes a machine producing pain. That's a bleak reading, but it's also a compelling one, because it makes the story about generational emotional starvation disguised as luxury. And if the drama dares to go there, it can create moments that are quietly devastating. Not big fights, quiet disappointments. Devya trying to win Donna's approval and failing. Donna glancing at Devya like she's evaluating an investment. Daryl witnessing that and realizing Devya's cruelty might be, in part, a child's tantrum inside a gilded cage. Again, not an excuse, but a layer. Layers make dramas rewatchable. Now, I want to get into a slightly more critical note, because loving a show doesn't mean ignoring its potential pitfalls. The biggest pitfall here is romanticizing exploitation. When you have a protagonist who's been humiliated for years, there's a risk the narrative treats that endurance as proof of love, which is a dangerous message. Endurance can be trauma response. If the show frames Daryl's suffering as noble rather than harmful, it undermines its own critique. So I'm looking for the drama to do something that many romances avoid, acknowledge that what happened to Daryl was damaging and not something love should require. That acknowledgement can come through character behavior, Daryl flinching, Daryl hesitating, Daryl struggling to trust kindness. It can come through dialogue, someone naming the cruelty, not brushing it off. It can come through visual language, Daryl's isolation, the coldness of the mansion, the way he's always placed at the edges. The show doesn't have to moralize, but it should not glamorize the humiliation as a romantic obstacle course. If it avoids that trap, it becomes a more responsible and more powerful story. And with the mother twist, there's another pitfall, turning Donna into a fantasy of, finally, a mature woman who appreciates him. That's also too easy. Appreciation isn't enough to repair 3 years of harm. If Donna becomes the soothing reward after Devya's cruelty, it risks making the narrative feel like a vending machine, insert suffering, receive affection. The story is more interesting if Donna isn't simply kinder. If she's different. If her kindness, if she has it, is complicated by power, by reputation, by family dynamics, by her own needs. That complexity is what makes the twist feel earned rather than gimmicky. There's also the question of consent and agency within a system narrative. If Daryl is compelled by the system, how free are his choices? The drama can explore that by showing Daryl resisting the system, questioning it, trying to redefine the mission on his own terms. Even small acts of defiance, ignoring a prompt, choosing silence instead of action, can become thematic statements. And if the system punishes him for defiance, that adds stakes and deepens the metaphor. Institutions punish those who stop playing their roles. Another rehook here, because I can feel the story's tension tightening like a wire. Once Daryl begins to shift toward Donna, does Donna actually become interested, or does she become suspicious? Suspicion is, to me, the most interesting route. Because a powerful woman like Donna would have every reason to be wary. A man who suddenly appears in her orbit, after years of attaching himself to her daughter, looks like someone with an agenda. And he does have an agenda, even if he doesn't fully understand it. That suspicion could create scenes where Donna tests him in subtle ways, asking questions that seem casual but are actually traps, observing how he responds to Devya when Donna is present, watching whether he tries to isolate her or respects distance. Those are the kinds of scenes that can be filmed like psychological chess, with close-ups on hands, pauses, sips of tea that last a second too long. And the music in those scenes should be minimal, almost absent, letting the tension come from performance. A faint low note under the dialogue. A soft ticking clock. The kind of sound that makes you aware of time passing, of stakes accumulating. If the show can do that, it taps into a thriller-like pleasure while still staying grounded in character. Let's talk about Daryl's psychology again, because it's the emotional spine. Daryl has been chasing Devya's approval for 3 years. That's not just a habit, it's identity. When you invest that much into one goal, you start to define yourself by it. I am the person who endures. I am the person who can take it. I am the person who will eventually be rewarded. When that reward is ripped away, or redefined, you don't just lose the goal, you lose the self. So Daryl's pivot toward Donna should feel like more than strategic redirection. It should feel like someone trying to salvage meaning from a collapsed structure. That's why he might cling to the new target even if it's uncomfortable. He needs the suffering to have been for something, because the alternative is unbearable, that he wasted 3 years for nothing. And that's the most human thing in the whole premise. We all do it in smaller ways. We stay in bad jobs because we've already invested time. We stay in bad relationships because leaving would mean admitting the years didn't build toward anything. We keep chasing the same kind of person who hurts us because the pattern feels like destiny. Daryl's story is an exaggerated version of that sunk cost fallacy, and the drama gets under your skin because it makes that fallacy visible. Now, if the show is particularly sharp, it will use the system's mistake to comment on sunk cost explicitly without ever saying the words. Daryl might think, I can't stop now, I'm almost done, even after learning he was wrong. That's tragic. And the drama can then show, slowly, that almost done is a lie people tell themselves to avoid grief. Because stopping means grieving. It means admitting loss. It means facing the emptiness after you remove the obsession. That grief is something I hope the drama actually gives space to, because grief is often what turns a melodrama into something resonant. Not just tears, grief as a quiet, dull heaviness. Daryl waking up and not knowing what to do because his day used to revolve around Devya's moods. Daryl experiencing a moment of peace and feeling anxious because peace is unfamiliar. Daryl realizing he doesn't even know what he likes because he's been focused on what Devya likes. Those are the moments that can make you ache. And I'll confess something else, because this drama poked at it, I've been the person who overinvests in approval. Not in a rich family mansion way, my life is significantly less marble, but in that emotional way where you start calibrating yourself to someone else's temperature. Watching Daryl do it for 3 years, even as a fictional setup, made me feel this tightness in my chest. It's not just sad protagonist. It's the recognition of how easy it is to turn love into a performance review. That's why I say I loved this story concept. It's melodramatic, yes, but it's rooted in something painfully real. Now, to keep things balanced, I should also say, a premise like this can sometimes over-rely on the humiliation to keep viewers engaged. There's a thin line between showing cruelty and indulging cruelty. If the drama lingers too lovingly on Devya humiliating Daryl, it risks turning the audience into voyeurs. The best approach is to show enough to establish the harm, then shift focus to consequences and internal change. The humiliation should not be entertainment, it should be context. So, when the narrative pivots, I want the show to shift its gaze. Less time watching Devya be cruel. More time watching Daryl become conscious. More time watching Donna's environment, the structure of the household, the systems that allow cruelty to flourish. That's what elevates the story from watch this mean girl to watch this machine. And the machine includes class. The rich family setting isn't just aesthetics, it's ideology. Devya humiliates Daryl because she believes she's entitled to. That entitlement is reinforced by wealth, by staff, by social circles that normalize cruelty downward. Donna, as the mother, likely embodies the family's ideology in a more polished way. The drama can use their household as a metaphor for larger social structures, how the wealthy consume the emotional labor of those beneath them and call it loyalty. Daryl's 3-year mission becomes a metaphor for how people chase proximity to power thinking it will save them, only to be chewed up by the very thing they admired. And this is where I'd love to see the drama's camera become a little more critical. Wide shots that dwarf Daryl in the mansion. Shots that emphasize barriers, gates, doors, staircases. The physical environment can constantly remind you, this is not a love story happening in a neutral space. It's happening in a fortress of class. Another rehook, because we are approaching the pressure point, if Daryl starts approaching Donna, what happens when Devya realizes she's no longer the prize, but the obstacle? Because that's when Devya's cruelty can become targeted in a different way. She's been humiliating Daryl out of entitlement, out of boredom, out of habit. But if she feels threatened, the cruelty could become strategic. And strategic cruelty is scarier. It's not a tantrum, it's warfare. If the show goes there, it can create a mid-story run of tension that feels like watching someone walk through a hallway of tripwires. Imagine Devya manipulating access to Donna. Imagine her rewriting narratives. Daryl is obsessed, Daryl is unstable, Daryl is trying to use you. And here's the kicker, those accusations wouldn't be entirely false. Because Daryl is being driven by a system. So Devya could weaponize truth. That's the most dangerous kind of manipulation, when the lie is only a little twist of the real thing. If the drama uses that, it becomes psychologically sharp. And then Daryl is forced into a different kind of challenge, not enduring humiliation, but maintaining integrity under suspicion. That's harder. Enduring humiliation is passive. Maintaining integrity requires agency. It requires him to know who he is and why he's doing what he's doing. But the system has prevented him from developing that self-knowledge because it's always told him what to want. So Daryl is suddenly asked to be a person in a narrative that has treated him like a tool. That's where the drama's emotional stakes peak. This also brings us to the relationship dynamics beyond romance. Devya and Daryl are not just potential lovers, they're also abuser and abused, employer-like and employee-like, high status and low status. Donna and Daryl, depending on how it's written, could become something like strategist and pawn, or protector and threat, or two people who recognize each other's loneliness. The drama can play with these relational archetypes, and what I appreciate is that the premise forces the audience to constantly question what kind of relationship they're actually watching. Is it romance? Is it survival? Is it manipulation? Is it negotiation? Often it's all of them, and that ambiguity is where adult melodrama lives. Now, I want to address something that I think will be divisive. Some viewers might interpret Daryl's pivot toward Donna as morally wrong because it involves the mother of the person he's been chasing. It can feel like betrayal, even though Devya has mistreated him. And I understand that discomfort. But I'd argue the drama isn't asking us to cheer for a gotcha romance, it's asking us to confront how the system has warped Daryl's approach to human beings. If you watch it through that lens, the discomfort becomes part of the point. We are not meant to feel purely comfortable. We are meant to feel the wrongness of treating people like targets. And if the show is truly smart, it will let Daryl feel that wrongness too. He might feel guilty. He might feel confused. He might try to rationalize it as mission. He might hate himself for it. That internal conflict is necessary if the drama wants to avoid feeling like it's endorsing manipulation. It needs to show that Daryl is aware, at least on some level, that he's been turned into someone who approaches relationships with an agenda. Awareness is the first step toward change. We also have to talk about the system's mission almost complete moment, because that implies there were tasks, progress markers, things Daryl did. The story could use those implied tasks as a way to reflect on emotional labor. If Daryl has been doing things for Devya, helping, supporting, sacrificing, and those actions were framed as mission tasks, then the drama is making a statement. In some relationships, your kindness becomes currency. The system formalizes that. It quantifies it. And the wrong target reveal then says, your currency wasn't even being spent in the right market. That's brutal. Now, do I think the drama could go too philosophical? Yes. There's a risk it becomes self-important. But the premise is so inherently metaphorical that if it stays purely surface level, it wastes its own potential. The best dramas balance metaphor with flesh and blood emotion. They let you feel the story first, then realize what it's saying afterward, like an aftertaste. Another pull-forward line, because it's what makes the story emotionally cruel in a way that feels honest. When your target changes, your memories don't, so you're forced to carry a past that no longer fits your future. That's Daryl's problem. He can pivot, but he can't erase. He can approach Donna, but he can't undo Devia. And that's why the drama has to let him be messy. If Daryl tries to be perfectly rational, okay, new target, new plan, it feels inhuman. A real person would spiral. A real person would rage. A real person would feel ashamed for having tolerated humiliation. A real person would feel embarrassed for having believed. A real person would feel grief. If the drama allows Daryl to experience those emotions, it becomes humane. If it turns him into a sleek protagonist who immediately executes a new strategy, it becomes shallow. And that's another reason I say I loved it. The premise itself is a dare. It dares the drama to be psychologically honest. And when it leans into that honesty, it hits harder than 100 glossy romances. Now, I want to talk about the show's potential to critique romantic persistence, because that trope is everywhere and often toxic. Daryl has persisted for 3 years. In many dramas, that would be framed as devotion and rewarded. Here, it's framed as degradation and then revealed as misdirected. That is such a pointed critique. It suggests that persistence is not inherently virtuous. Persistence without self-respect is self-harm. Persistence in the face of cruelty is not romance, it's a warning sign. If the drama leans into that critique, if it shows that Daryl's persistence didn't make Devia kinder, it made him smaller, then it's doing something socially valuable while still being entertaining. Another rehook, because it's where the drama's critique becomes personal for a lot of viewers. How many of us have been taught that being chosen is worth any cost? That's the cultural system the drama is really talking about. The mission system is a metaphor for a broader social script: perform, endure, be worthy, be chosen. Daryl is living that script to an extreme. The show is asking us to question it. Now, let's talk about what the drama is really saying about class. Devia humiliates Daryl because class allows her to. Donna's status likely allows her to avoid overt cruelty because she doesn't need it. Her power is structural. Daryl's position makes him vulnerable. The system enters that class dynamic and turns it into a game. That's the most cynical part. Even class exploitation becomes gamified. That's a very modern critique. It suggests that even our emotional lives are being quantified and optimized. We chase targets in relationships, we track progress, we pursue validation as if it's a score. The drama literalizes that and shows how hollow it is. The rich family setting is important here because it makes the exploitation visible. Wealth allows people to treat others as accessories. Devia treats Daryl as an accessory, something that exists to orbit her. Donna may treat people as resources. Daryl, under the system, treats people as objectives. Everyone is objectifying everyone. The drama's hope, if it has one, is that Daryl can break that cycle. Another pull-forward line, because it's the story's quite moral challenge: can someone raised as a tool learn to see others as people when the world keeps rewarding him for treating them as targets? That's the hard part. Because the system rewards target thinking. The family rewards target thinking. Even the audience can reward target thinking if we treat romance as a conquest. The drama has to push against that. Now, I'm going to offer one more contrarian angle that might be unpopular. I don't actually need the system to be defeated for this drama to feel satisfying. A lot of viewers will want Daryl to break the system, to hack it, to escape it, to destroy it. That can be cathartic. But I think the more interesting resolution is internal, Daryl living with the system's prompts and choosing not to obey them. Because in real life, you don't always destroy the system that shaped you. You learn to live differently inside it. You learn to ignore it. You learn to reclaim your agency even when the external structure remains. That's a mature ending, and it fits the show's thematic focus on strategy rather than external victory. What I need is not the system exploding. What I need is Daryl's relationship to the system changing. The system can keep speaking and Daryl can stop listening. That's power. Another rehook, because it's the hinge between plot satisfaction and emotional satisfaction, the most satisfying win isn't Daryl getting Donna, it's Daryl getting his own mind back. Now, I want to talk about the drama's emotional pacing again, but specifically how it handles hope. Early on, Daryl's hope is naive and dependent on Devya. After the reveal, his hope becomes confused and desperate, attached to the idea that switching targets will fix the pain. The show should then gradually shift his hope towards something healthier, self-respect, autonomy, peace. That's a difficult hope to portray because it's quieter than romance hope. But it's more meaningful. If the drama manages that shift without turning it into a lecture, it becomes genuinely resonant. One way to portray that is through Daryl's body language. Early on, he's always leaning forward, always anticipating Devya's needs. Later, he might start to sit back. He might take up space. He might breathe more slowly. Those are subtle changes, but they communicate an internal shift from anxiety-driven performance to grounded presence. Another way is through the way he moves through the mansion. Early on, he might move like a guest who isn't sure he's allowed. Later, he might move like someone who has decided he belongs wherever he stands, not because he has status, but because he's human. Another way is through his voice. Early Daryl might speak quickly, apologetically, with a rising intonation like he's always asking permission. Later, his voice might slow down, drop in pitch, become more declarative. Again, not swagger, clarity. Another pull-forward line, because it's one of the most satisfying character arcs when it's earned, the first time Daryl doesn't explain himself to someone who doesn't deserve an explanation is the first time he truly steps out of the mission mindset. Because the mission mindset demands justification. It demands constant proof. It demands performance. Self-respect doesn't. Self-respect allows you to say no and let the silence stand. Now, what about Devya's arc? Even if the drama isn't primarily about her growth, she needs an arc for the story to feel dynamic. Her arc might not be redemption, it might be escalation. Or it might be confrontation with her own emptiness. Or it might be a collapse of her control. The most compelling arc for Devya, to me, is one where she's forced to face the fact that her cruelty has consequences she can't buy her way out of. Not necessarily legal consequences, again, we don't have that information, but emotional consequences. She loses her mirror. She loses her sense of centrality. She loses the comfort of someone always being beneath her. That loss can make her more cruel or it can make her unravel. Either way, it's consequence. And Donna's arc, similarly, might be about revealing what kind of power she really holds. Does she protect the family's image at all costs? Does she care about Devya's morality? Does she see Daryl as a person or as a tool? Does she feel guilt for what has been allowed? The drama can explore those questions without giving Donna a dramatic transformation. Sometimes the revelation of who someone already is the arc. Another rehook, because this is where the late-game tension becomes almost unbearable if it's done right, when Daryl's new strategy starts working, is it because he's becoming healthier, or because he's becoming better at playing the same game? That's the moral suspense. And it's such a clever use of the system trope. Because working in a system doesn't always mean thriving as a person. It often means conforming more effectively. Daril's growth could be mistaken for strategic improvement. The drama can play with that ambiguity and make you question your own desire for him to succeed. Now, I want to talk about the drama's potential to use Devia's mother, Donna, as a lens on motherhood itself. Motherhood in rich family dramas is often either sanctified or demonized. The more interesting route is motherhood as role. Donna is not just a mother, she's a mother in a hierarchy. She's likely expected to be dignified, controlled, respectable. She might have sacrificed personal desires for family stability. She might have learned to treat emotions as liabilities. If so, her relationship with Devia could be a story of emotional inheritance. Devia inherited wealth, but also inherited emotional patterns, control, cruelty, fear of vulnerability. Daril's presence might expose those patterns. That's rich subtext, and it can elevate the drama into something generational. Because what's Devia really doing when she humiliates Daril? She's enforcing a hierarchy. Who taught her that hierarchy? The family. Who maintains the family? Donna. That's why Donna can't be morally neutral. Even if she's personally kind, she's part of the structure. The drama can explore that tension, personal kindness versus structural harm. Donna might be kind in conversation and still maintain a household that crushes people. That's how real power often operates. It's not always overtly cruel, it's indifferent. Another pull-forward line, because it points to the show's most adult theme, kindness without accountability is just another form of control. If Donna is kind to Daril but never addresses the harm that occurred under her roof, her kindness becomes suspicious. It becomes a way to manage him, to keep him quiet. If she acknowledges harm, even subtly, it changes everything. It suggests conscience. It suggests possibility. Again, not romance, possibility of humanity in a system. Now, I want to talk about how the show might use costumes and props to show Daril's evolution, because these details can be quietly brilliant. Daril early on might carry things for Devia, bags, documents, gifts, literal burdens. He might be shown with hands full, always in service mode. Later, if he starts reclaiming agency, you might see him with empty hands more often. That's a simple visual motif, hands freed. You might see him stop carrying Devia's things. Or you might see him carry something for himself, his own bag, his own notebook, his own object that signals personal life outside the mission. Those are the tiny production choices that make an arc feel embodied. Similarly, Devia's props might reflect her need for control, phone, keys, accessories, symbols of status. Donna's props might reflect governance, documents, jewelry with family meaning, objects with history. The show can tell you who they are by what they hold and how they hold it. A character who grips tightly is different from a character who rests a hand lightly. Control is physical. Another rehook, because it's the kind of detail that makes you appreciate the craft. Watch how often Daril is shown holding something for someone else, and when he finally stops. Now, there's a question that hangs over the whole drama: why does the system exist? We don't have that information, and I'm not going to fabricate lore. But the show doesn't need a deep sci-fi explanation for the system to function thematically. The system can remain mysterious because it's essentially a metaphor. But the drama does need to establish what the system wants in a practical sense: completion of a mission, closeness to a target, something like that. And the wrong target reveal suggests the system is either incompetent or manipulative. Either way, it positions the system as unreliable. That unreliability is thematic, external guidance is unreliable. Only internal truth matters. So the question becomes, can Daril trust himself? That's the emotional arc. Daril has outsourced his trust to the system. He has outsourced his worth to Devia. He has outsourced his future to completion. The drama's journey is him taking those things back. Another pull-forward line, because it's the most human struggle in the whole premise: Daril doesn't just have to stop chasing Devia, he has to stop chasing permission. Permission to exist in the room. Permission to want. Permission to say no. permission to be human. That's what he's been seeking from Devya and from the system. And if he can stop seeking permission, fate changes. Now, let's address something that could be a sticking point for newcomers. The mother twist can feel morally murky because of the family connection. But I think the drama's point isn't to celebrate the murkiness, it's to use the murkiness to expose how broken Daril's worldview has become under the system. If Daril can pivot his target so easily, it reveals that he hasn't been loving, he's been pursuing. That's uncomfortable, but it's also insightful. It makes you question the romantic narratives we consume. How often do stories teach us that devotion is about persistence rather than mutual respect? The drama flips that and says, persistence can be a symptom of exploitation. Another rehook, because it frames the drama's critique of romance culture in one sharp question. If love can be rerouted by a system prompt, was it ever love, or was it always a mission? That's why the show's moderate spoiler approach still allows for deep discussion without endgame specifics. The endgame, who ends up with who, is less important than the emotional and thematic journey. The show's success is measured by whether Daril becomes more human, not by whether he gets a specific partner. Now, I'm going to talk about one more thing I loved, the way the premise invites the drama to explore shame as a living presence. Daril's shame is not just embarrassment, it's identity. Shame is the feeling that you are fundamentally wrong. Devya's humiliation of him for 3 years likely deepened that shame. The system's wrong target reveal likely amplifies it. You were wrong not only in behavior, but in purpose. That's soul-level shame. And the drama can depict shame visually. Daril avoiding mirrors, avoiding eye contact, standing at edges, shrinking in frames. Then, as he changes, shame can be replaced by something else: anger, grief, dignity. That shift is satisfying not because it's triumphant, but because it's real. Another pull-forward line, because it's where the drama becomes cathartic. The first time Daril feels anger without immediately swallowing it is the first time he's no longer ashamed of being alive. Anger, in this context, is not violence. It's self-recognition. It's the emotional signal that something is wrong and you deserve better. Daril needs anger to break the cycle. The drama can show that anger emerging in tiny ways: a sharper tone, a refusal to smile, a pause before compliance, a stare that doesn't drop. Those are the early sparks of agency. Now, in terms of late-game structure, the drama likely builds toward a confrontation, not necessarily a literal fight, but a moment where Daril's new strategy is tested publicly or irrevocably. In wealthy family dramas, public moments matter because reputation is everything. So a turning point might involve a family gathering, a social event, a situation where Devya's cruelty becomes visible to more people, or where Daril's refusal becomes visible. Again, I'm not claiming specifics. But the show's world naturally makes public optics a weapon. If Daril refuses in public, it's risky. It can make him look ungrateful, unstable, opportunistic. Devya can weaponize that. Donna can interpret it as lack of control. The system might punish him. That's why public refusal is such a powerful act. It's not just self-respect, it's strategic. It's a new strategy, refusing to be managed by shame. Another rehook, because it's where the drama's title becomes literal. A wrong strategy is trying to survive humiliation in private. A changed fate might require saying no where everyone can hear it. Now, let's talk about acting again, but specifically in confrontation scenes. If the drama includes a confrontation where Daril finally addresses Devya's cruelty, the actor playing Daril needs to avoid melodrama. The power of such a scene comes from restraint. A character who has been silent for 3 years doesn't suddenly become eloquent. He becomes blunt. His voice might shake. He might not have perfect words. He might say something simple like, "You always treated me like I was nothing." That's enough. Overwriting such a scene with poetic monologues would feel false. The drama's strength lies in its realism within melodrama. Similarly, Devya's actor in such a confrontation needs to show layered defense mechanisms. Devya might laugh to avoid vulnerability. She might attack to avoid guilt. She might minimize. She might blame. She might accuse Daryl of being obsessed. Those are realistic defense strategies. If the actor can show the fear beneath the cruelty, even just a flicker, it makes the scene more complex. Again, not to redeem her, but to make her human. And Donna's presence in confrontations, if she's present, should be calm, which can be more chilling than anger. A calm, powerful person watching conflict is often the scariest presence because their calm suggests control. If Donna speaks, her words should land like policy, not emotion. That's character consistency. Another pull-forward line, because it's the kind of moment that can redefine the whole narrative. The first time Donna speaks not as a mother but as the family's authority, Devya stops looking like a villain and starts looking like a child with too much power. That's an interesting reframing. Devya can be both harmful and emotionally immature. Wealth often arrests emotional development because consequences are softened. Devya might have never learned empathy because she never needed to. That doesn't excuse her harm, but it explains why her cruelty is so casual. Donna, by contrast, likely learned consequences. She likely learned to manage image. She's emotionally mature in a strategic sense, even if she's emotionally distant. That difference can create a mother-daughter dynamic that's fascinating. Devya acting out, Donna managing. Daryl becomes the catalyst that reveals their true relationship. Now, I want to address a viewer reaction I can anticipate. Some people might feel uncomfortable with Daryl being instructed to approach Donna because it feels like crossing boundaries. And that discomfort is valid. But I think the drama's value lies in not making you comfortable. It's making you confront how broken mission-based intimacy is. If you feel uncomfortable, that's the point. It's showing you that treating people as targets is wrong, even if the target is someone you might prefer. It's a critique of objectification disguised as a twist. Another rehook, because it's the moral gut check. If you find yourself cheering for Daryl to win, Donna, ask yourself, are you cheering for his healing or for his conquest? That question makes the drama more interesting. It turns the audience into a participant in the theme. And I love stories that do that, stories that make you aware of your own genre cravings. Now, I'm going to talk about the drama's likely emotional resolution, still staying in moderate spoiler territory. A satisfying resolution for a story like this doesn't necessarily require a neat romantic pairing. It requires closure in terms of Daryl's agency. Daryl needs to make a choice that is clearly his, not the system's. He needs to demonstrate that his strategy has changed. That could mean refusing the mission, redefining it, stepping away, or choosing a relationship based on mutual respect rather than completion. The specifics can vary. The point is agency. For Devya, a satisfying resolution doesn't require redemption. It requires consequence, emotional, social, relational. Devya's consequence might be losing Daryl's attention, losing her narrative centrality, confronting her mother's authority, or being forced to recognize the harm she caused. Again, specifics can vary. The point is that cruelty doesn't remain cost-free. For Donna, a satisfying resolution requires clarity about her stance. Is she complicit? Is she strategic? Is she capable of genuine recognition? The show needs to reveal who she is. She doesn't need to change dramatically, but she needs to be seen. For the system, a satisfying resolution requires Daryl's relationship to it to change. The system doesn't need to be destroyed, but it needs to be demoted in his psyche. It needs to stop being God. Daryl needs to stop living like an NPC in his own life. Another pull-forward line, because it's the emotional promise the title makes, fate changing isn't a twist, it's a decision. Now, I want to talk about something that made me genuinely admire the premise as storytelling. It sets up a protagonist who is deeply unglamorous in the beginning. Daryl is not a cool anti-hero. He's not witty and detached. He's needy. He's compliant. He's desperate. That kind of protagonist can be hard to watch, and a lot of dramas avoid it because they fear audiences will judge. But it's brave. It's also honest. Many people in toxic dynamics are not glamorous. They are messy and anxious and always trying. And by making Daryl that person, the drama creates room for a real transformation. If Daryl started confident, the shift wouldn't mean much. And because the drama positions Daryl as someone who has endured humiliation for 3 years, any small act of self-respect becomes monumental. That's smart narrative math. It doesn't need explosions. It needs one, I won't. One silence where he used to apologize. Those moments become huge because the baseline was so low. Another rehook, because it captures why this kind of character arc is so satisfying. The most cinematic thing in a story like this isn't a kiss, it's a boundary. Now, let's talk about romance chemistry. Because I know that's what many viewers will care about, and it's fair. Even if the drama is critiquing mission-based intimacy, it's still playing with romance dynamics. Chemistry between Daryl and Devya, early on, would likely be toxic chemistry, tension, imbalance, push-pull. Some viewers might find it compelling because it's intense. But intensity is not health. The drama's job is to depict that intensity without endorsing it. Chemistry between Daryl and Donna, if it develops, should feel different. Less fireworks, more gravity. Less chase, more negotiation. Less humiliation, more testing. If the show accidentally gives Daryl and Donna the same dynamic as Daryl and Devya, just with softer lighting, it fails. The whole point is difference. And if there is romantic tension with Donna, it should be complicated by power. Donna's power makes any intimacy ethically loaded. Daryl's mission makes it even more loaded. The show can depict attraction without pretending it's pure. That's adult storytelling. Another pull-forward line, because it's where romance becomes ethics, attraction is easy, consent to a dynamic that doesn't exploit either person is the hard part. Now, I want to give a quick note on humor, because even in heavy dramas, humor can be a pressure release. The premise has inherent dark comedy. The system telling Daryl he wasted 3 years is almost absurd in its cruelty. But the humor should be dark, not goofy. It should come from irony, from human coping, from the ridiculousness of institutions. If the show uses humor that way, it can make the heaviness bearable without undermining it. A small self-aware moment from Daryl, an exhausted laugh, a muttered "of course," could feel incredibly human. It would also make the audience feel closer to him. But the humor should never be at Daryl's expense in a way that replicates Devya's cruelty. The show already has enough humiliation. It doesn't need to ask the audience to laugh at him. It needs the audience to feel for him. Another rehook, because it's where the drama's tone choice matters. If the show laughs at Daryl, it becomes cruel. If it laughs with Daryl, it becomes healing. Now, I'm going to shift toward a more critical craft lens, because for critics, and honestly for anyone who cares about storytelling craft, this drama's success will depend on control. Control of tone, control of pacing, control of moral framing. The premise is volatile. It can easily become exploitative, sensational, or simplistic. To avoid that, the direction needs restraint. The editing needs patience. The performances need nuance. The writing needs to resist the urge to justify cruelty with backstory. I'll say it plainly, backstory is not redemption. If the drama tries to explain Devya's cruelty by giving her a tragic reason and then asks us to forgive her, it risks undermining the story's critique of endurance. The point is not that Devya had reasons, the point is that Daryl should not have had to endure. You can understand Devya's psychology and still hold her accountable. That's the balance. Similarly, if the drama tries to make Donna the right target by making her morally perfect, it becomes propaganda for the twist rather than storytelling. Donna should be complicated. Power should be complicated. Otherwise the show becomes a simple upgrade narrative, young cruel rich girl versus older kind rich woman. That's too easy. The premise deserves better. Another pull-forward line, because it captures the drama's potential, the most satisfying version of this story is one where every character is strategic, but only one learns to be honest. Now, I want to talk about the sense of space again, because it's one of my favorite cinematic aspects of wealthy family dramas. Space is power. Who has private spaces? Who has public spaces? Devya likely treats the entire house as her stage. Donna likely has private spaces that even Devya hesitates to enter. Daryl likely has no space that is truly his. That lack of space is a form of dehumanization. If the drama shows Daryl finally claiming a small space, maybe a room, a corner, a moment, that becomes symbolic of his agency. Even if it's not literal. It can be as simple as Daryl closing a door behind him. Closing a door can be a revolution for someone who has been living in open access to humiliation. Another rehook, because it's one of those simple things that can land like a punch. Watch for the first time Daryl closes a door on Devya. That's the kind of moment that makes you cheer quietly. Now, because we are supposed to end with a verdict only after we've gone long enough, I'm going to keep living inside the story's themes a bit more, because there's still a lot to unpack. One of the most intriguing subtexts here is generational misdirection. Daryl misdirected his strategy toward Devya. But Devya herself may be misdirected, performing cruelty as a strategy to earn power or approval. Donna may have misdirected her life, choosing control and stability as strategy, perhaps at the cost of emotional truth. Everyone is strategizing wrong in different ways. Fate changes when one person changes strategy. That's a beautiful thematic structure. It suggests that the real antagonist is not a person but a pattern, the pattern of using others as tools to manage your own insecurity. Devya uses Daryl. Daryl uses Devya as a target. The system uses Daryl. Donna uses her household. Everyone is using. The drama's hope is that someone stops. Another pull-forward line, because it's the show's quiet moral dream, what if the only way to beat a system is to stop using people the way the system taught you to? That's the kind of theme that makes a drama feel like it has a soul. Now, I want to touch on something that might sound small but matters, how the drama treats wealth aesthetically. Some shows fetishize wealth, lingering shots of cars, clothes, jewelry. That can be enjoyable, but it can also undermine critique by making the audience envy the system. This drama should treat wealth as atmosphere, not aspiration. The mansion should feel beautiful but cold. The clothes should feel expensive but restrictive. The cars should feel powerful but isolating. If the show makes wealth look like a cage, it aligns with Daryl's experience. If it makes wealth look like a fantasy, it risks making Daryl's suffering feel like the price of entry into a dream. That's not the story's strength. Another rehook. Because it's a key tonal question, does the drama film the mansion like a palace, or like a prison? If it's a prison, the story becomes coherent. If it's a palace, the story risks becoming contradictory. Now, I'm going to pivot to who I think will connect with this drama most strongly, not as a verdict yet but as an emotional observation. If you've ever been stuck in a dynamic where you kept trying and kept being dismissed, Daryl will hit you. If you've ever chased someone's approval because you thought it would prove your worth, this story will feel personal. If you've ever been inside a workplace or relationship that moved the goalposts, the system twist will feel like a nightmare you recognize. And if you've ever looked back and realized you spent years pursuing something that wasn't even what you wanted, the wrong target reveal will feel like a punch to the stomach. I'm saying this because the drama's emotional intensity isn't just melodrama, it's recognition. That's why I loved it. It took a tropey premise and aimed it at something real. Another pull-forward line, because we are nearing the final verdict territory emotionally, the best dramas don't just entertain you, they make you recognize yourself in a character you didn't expect to understand. Now, let me address a potential critique some viewers might have: Daryl is dumb for staying. I get that reaction, but I think it misses the point. The drama isn't asking you to admire Daryl's choices. It's asking you to understand his conditioning. It's showing how people become trapped. It's showing how a system, literal and social, can train you to accept humiliation as normal. Calling him dumb is a defensive reaction. It's the viewer saying, I would never. But the truth is, many people stay in harmful dynamics for years. Not because they're dumb. Because they're human. Because they're hopeful. Because they're afraid. Because they've been taught to equate suffering with love. This drama dramatizes that reality in a heightened way. And if you can sit with that, it becomes more than entertainment. Another rehook, because it challenges the audience's moral comfort. Judging Daryl is easy, asking why the world let Devya humiliate him for 3 years is harder. That's the show's broader critique. It's not just mean girl bad. It's hierarchies enable cruelty. It's institutions gamify people. It's communities normalize humiliation. Those are bigger themes. Now, I'm going to finally begin moving toward a more explicit evaluation of the drama's strengths and weaknesses, but still in the same flowing narration style, because at this point we've lived in the story's emotional and craft mechanics long enough to earn a verdict. What I loved most is the premise's cruelty used as critique. The system telling Daryl he targeted the wrong person right before completion is one of those twists that doesn't just change plot, it changes meaning. It recontextualizes everything. It forces the protagonist, and the audience, to confront sunk cost and misdirected devotion. It's not a twist for surprise's sake, it's a twist that exposes the story's thematic bones. I also loved the potential for nuanced power dynamics between Devya and Donna. The daughter's overt cruelty versus the mother's structural authority is a rich contrast. It creates tension that isn't just romantic, it's political. And Daryl being caught between them while also being manipulated by a system creates a multi-layered conflict that feels more adult than a typical mission romance setup. On the craft side, when the drama leans into visual storytelling, framing Daryl at the edges, using space as hierarchy, treating the mansion as a cold environment, it becomes genuinely cinematic. The best moments, in a drama like this, are the quiet ones, a utensil placed down, a gaze held, a door closed, a no spoken softly. Those moments depend on performances that can carry microtension, and if the cast delivers that, it's the difference between a gimmick and a gut punch. Now, the weaknesses or risks. The biggest risk is indulgence in humiliation. If the show spends too long in the 3-year humiliation dynamic without enough variation or insight, viewers can become numb or frustrated. The humiliation needs to serve character and theme, not just plot. Another risk is romanticizing endurance. If Daryl's suffering is framed as noble devotion rather than damaging conditioning, the show accidentally endorses the toxic trope it's positioned to critique. The writing has to be careful with that framing. Another risk is making Donna a convenient reward, the right target, as the kinder woman who finally appreciates him. That would flatten the mother twist into an upgrade fantasy. The drama needs to keep Donna complex and ethically charged. Power is never neutral, and if Donna is the true target, the story has to interrogate what it means to approach power. Finally, the system itself can be a writing crutch if overused. The system should create moral pressure, not replace character motivation. Daryl's arc has to become internal, his strategy changing, rather than purely external rerouting. And with all that said, here's where I land, honestly, as someone who loved it. Strategi Salah Takdir Berubah works best when you watch it not as a romance about the right woman, but as a drama about the wrong mindset. It's about a man learning that being chosen is not the same as being valued. It's about unlearning the belief that humiliation is the price of love. It's about the terrifying freedom of realizing you've been chasing permission your whole life, and deciding to stop. If you are the kind of viewer who wants a clean, fluffy romance where persistence is rewarded and cruelty gets softened into misunderstanding, this might frustrate you, because the premise is inherently uncomfortable and the moral knots don't untie neatly. But if you like dramas that use heightened setups to talk about real emotional patterns, power, class, self-worth, conditioning, this one has teeth. It's for viewers who enjoy watching character psychology evolve in micro-choices, for people who notice how a camera frames a room to show who belongs, for fans who can handle moral discomfort without needing the story to sanitize it. I'd recommend it especially to newcomers who think system dramas are always shallow or purely gimmicky, because this one, at its best, uses the system as a critique of transactional intimacy. And I'd recommend it to fans of rich family melodrama who are tired of the same old, cold heiress melts routine, because the mother pivot reframes the whole power structure in a way that can be genuinely fresh when executed with nuance. If you watched along with me and you've got a take, especially on Devya, because I know she's going to split the room, drop it in the comments. I read them, and I love seeing how differently people interpret power dynamics. And if you want more long-form drama storytelling like this on Jonota News, you already know what to do. Subscribe if it feels right, and I'll catch you in the next one. Because sometimes the most dramatic fate change isn't who you end up with, it's the moment you stop letting anyone, even a system, tell you what you're worth.